Yeah, exactly. I thought you meant like this is rats.
Kia ora koutou. Haere mai, and welcome to this event tonight, hosted by Live Wellington. Have we got it right in terms of our approach to earthquake strengthening and our apartment cover with insurance? Thank you so much for coming along tonight and bearing with us with the venue change. We had such a lot of interest in this event and so many RSVPs that we thought it was too risky to stick with the garden room across the way. So we've moved in here. So thank you very much for doing that. Just in terms of health and safety, just letting you know there are toilets that are down through the door there if you need them. And if there's any kind of emergency like an earthquake, we stop and hold, and then if we need to go outside, there's a meeting place across the road by the motorway. Let's hope that it'll be a bit ironic if an earthquake did occur. So let's hope not. My name's Jane O'Loughlin. I'm the convener of Live Wellington, and I know there's quite a few people who haven't been to a Live Wellington event before, so I'll just let you know what our group's about. We were formed around the time of the spatial plan, which is one of the planning documents for the city. And we got together realising that while there are very strong voices in the city for more housing and for getting rid of any controls and impediments that get in the way of housing, there was not a very strong voice for livability. And there seemed to us that there was a risk that in the race to build more houses and to let developers do kind of what they want to do, there was a risk that ideas of good design, green space and people-centred buildings might get lost. So Live Wellington was formed, bringing together groups from across the inner city to try and tackle some of these problems. So if you're interested in that side of things, by all means go to our website, livewellington.org, and sign up to go on our mailing list. For us, the issue of earthquake-prone buildings is very important to the livability of the city. More Wellingtonians will be living in apartment buildings in the coming decades if the city embraces denser living for practical and environmental reasons. If we can't get apartment living right, the city risks dying. So we have to get it right, and we have to put pressure on authorities to find solutions. So with us tonight, we have two affected homeowners, Mel Johnston and Craig Sengelow, who are apartment owners who face daunting costs to bring their Newtown apartment block up to current earthquake standards. And we also have with us the former head of EQC, David Middleton, on the far side there. David was made an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit for his leadership of EQC, and since then has been a consultant on insurance matters overseas and in New Zealand, including providing advice to the previous Wellington Mayor, Justin Lester, and to the Minister of Finance. So questions about insurance, I think, will arise, and it's great to have David here tonight. After the presentations and the talks, there'll be a chance for people in the audience to ask questions, which I will moderate, and we've got a microphone that we can use for that. We have a full sort of technical setup here tonight, which is enabling us to go out on Facebook as well for people who couldn't make it here in person. So I'll hand over now to Mel Johnston and Craig Sengelow, who are going to tell us about their story, which has gone on for many, many years, and what they are doing in their struggle to get the attention from the authorities to get some action. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Kia ora tātou. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So thanks. I'm the chair of the McAllister Heights Body Corporate, and Craig is a committee member. I just want to acknowledge that we've been working on this since 2010, and Craig's been the chair for a good half of that time as well. So we've sort of shared it between us, and this whole job we've been doing together, really, which has been great to have that continuity and camaraderie, really. So a bit about our building, and I just want to say thanks, Jane, for inviting us to this event, and thank you all for coming. Are there any people in the audience who are from an earthquake-prone building themselves? A few, yeah, cool, thank you. I just want to show you our building. So that's us there. We're on Adelaide Road. If you're whizzing down from town, you might see it as you look up from Rintle Street or Adelaide Road. If you show the next photo as well, it's sort of set back off the road. It's a 1970s building. You can go to the next slide now. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, it's a 1970s building. It's got 28 units in it. And it was built, the historical records show that it was built for people of modest means. That's certainly the profile of the building owners. Certainly was when we bought in, Craig and I bought in. We've been friends for ages, and we bought into the same building along with another set of friends. At that stage, it was very much our first home, entry level apartment block, and the sorts of people that live there. There's quite a lot of people that live alone, retirees, first homeowners, people that have downsized. So it's a place where there's people who are sort of on, a lot of people who are on low to medium incomes. Is that better? Yeah, please tell me again if that's an issue. And the other key thing about our building is that it was a company share building when it was first built. And I'm not sure if you've come across that before. It's a slightly odd legal structure, which means that you've actually got a company and the owners have shares in that company and a license to occupy their apartment. It's a peculiar thing to Wellington, I think, particularly for buildings of that era. And it was on leasehold land, and I'll come to that soon as to why that's relevant. But I think probably the most important thing about our building is that it really feels like a community of people. So Craig and I don't live there anymore. We've both moved on for different reasons, and as have many other owners for just personal reasons. But there's a really nice community of owners who've known each other for a long time and have neighbourly relationships with each other and care for each other, which is, we're very lucky. We can go to the next one. So what happened? In 2010, we got declared earthquake prone by the Wellington City Council, and we were in the middle of a big project at the time. We were replacing all of the windows in our building. So it was $1 million project, and all of our owners, we just asked them to stump up $41,000 each to replace all of the windows. It was a huge project. It took, I think, 18 months or something from beginning to end. So that came in during that project, and we were, at the time, we were just sort of quite consumed by this other thing. And we also, I think at the time, thought, well, we'll sort that out and we'll save up for it, and it won't be that hard. But a year or so went past, and we sort of realised that actually this was quite real. And part of the reason for that was that the following year, the Christchurch earthquake, the second major earthquake, happened. And so the idea of being earthquake prone went from being sort of an academic sort of administrative thing to actually this is real, and people had this picture in their heads of buildings collapsing. So we suddenly found that our owners couldn't sell their apartments anymore. And we were a company share building that historically have had a lot of owner occupiers, and we found we had to start relaxing our rules about people moving out and having tenants because they just couldn't sell, they couldn't move on for genuine reasons. So we had a lot more tenants coming into our building during that period. And by 2012, Craig and I were really going, okay, we really need to get our heads around this. And we spent a lot of time, I think our first session was on the floor of my apartment with some large bits of paper and some Sharpie pens, sort of mind mapping this sort of complicated situation that we were in. And for the next few years, we embarked on kind of two things in parallel. One was an exercise to purchase our land and convert to unit title ownership. And the other exercise was going through the whole investigation and design work with all the professionals that we're involved with. So that investigation stage went on for quite a while, and we spent $200,000 of owners' money on that. We had to raise a special levy during that time to fund that. And the reason that we wanted to convert to unit title and purchase the land was really just to release some value in our own property. Banks looked very askance at us as a building and a collection of people with this, these two things that were very unusual together. And we were advised by lawyers to sort of shore ourselves up and make ourselves a bit more normal to banks, which we did. So while that process went on, we were going through a design process. And originally, when we went to the banks, we thought we were dealing with a $30,000 cost per owner. That was when we had what was called a rough order of costs. By 2015, we knew it had gone up to $61,000 an owner. And that was our preliminary design. And we'd been asked by the bank to go to that stage so that they had a bit more certainty about what they were dealing with. We were shopping around all the banks at this stage as well, weren't we? Which was, that was over a year we spent going around all the property finance people with our lawyers, trying to get them to look at us and consider this process, and nobody was interested. And finally, we went to Westpac, where a lot of our people had lending, and they put us onto their remediation team, who had historically dealt with leaky buildings, and they were able to get their heads around our situation because they knew what it was like to have, basically a distressed asset, and a whole lot of people trying to navigate out of that. And also because of their exposure in the building, it was sort of in their interest to help us through. So we actually, by the end of 2017, we pulled off that land purchase and unit titling exercise, and that was a huge win. Our owners paid $71,000 each for that, and that meant that we stopped paying rent on our land, and we were at that time thinking, great, now we can go back to the bank. As soon as we get our detailed design, we'll go back to the bank and we can start the project. But in 2019, we got terrible news that our project costs had quadrupled, and we were now looking at $240,000 per owner for that project. So just sort of go back to that thing I said at the beginning. The building's not a flash building, and it's entry level, basically bottom of the market, I'd say. We both, bought in when we were single. I was a single parent, and so it's very much not an asset that you can sort of just lose $100,000 or $200,000 on. It's quite devastating for that group of people to lose that kind of money. And anyway, we our next step was to go, look, can we just try something else? We went back to our engineers and said, can you do another design, please? And we finally got it back down to $180,000 per owner. That was still a lot of money. We were now looking at an 18-month construction project as well, because of the scale of the project had changed. And just as a side note, during this process, you might be wondering, did we explore just bailing on the whole building? Yes, we did. So we explored selling to anybody who wanted to pick it up, most likely a developer. And we explored that with a couple of real estate companies who thought we'd probably fetch between $130,000 and $150,000 per owner for our asset, which we didn't think was an attractive option and not something that we wanted to recommend to our owners. So then we started thinking, well, how do we do this? And actually, should we do this? Feels like an irresponsible thing to recommend to people, given that we knew because of the people in our building that it would actually devastate some of them. So that was part one, trying to comply. Part two was going, okay, how can we start to question that? So we started teaming up with Geraldine Murphy from inner city Wellington, who some of you will know. And I just want to acknowledge that she would be here if she wasn't out of town. And she was already, actually during our design process, she was already in the lobbying stage, because that problem had already started surfacing for other buildings. Back when we thought we were only looking at $30,000 per owner, we went along to a presentation that she did and we sort of walked away and went, well, thank goodness that's not us, listening to some of the other stories, which were horror stories even back then. So we've done a lot of work with Geraldine Murphy, and she's done an enormous amount of work for us and for other earthquake-prone building owners. We've had quite a bit to do with Kāinga Ora, who were the people in charge of operationalising a loan scheme that got put in place. And that's called the Residential Earthquake-Prone Building Suspensory Loan Scheme, which is a bit of a mouthful. But what that is it's a scheme that enables people who get turned down by a bank to access money. They don't have to service that debt during the time that they live in the building, but as soon as they're no longer living in the building, that they have to pay that back with some interest, not full bank interest, but some interest still. Unfortunately, that scheme wasn't really fit for purpose when it was first launched. It had a lot of holes in it, and so we gave quite a lot of feedback to Kāinga Ora and MB to say this is what you need to do to make it work for us. And I think about 18 months later, it finally became fit for purpose. So we started to answer our first question, which is, can we do this? And the answer was yes, we could, either through retail bank lending or the suspensory loan scheme. We thought all of our owners should be able to do that work. But then we were still left with the question of, should we do this? Is this reasonable to ask? How's the audio level? Is that okay? Cool, thank you. I'll just rattle through these because it's a little bit boring, but we have had a lot to do with MB during this time now, the agency who developed the policy behind the scheme. So they've done surveys, we've taken part in reviews, we've done lots of information requests. We're part of a trial support service that they're running at the moment that they're piloting. And Craig has also provided quite a lot of feedback on a framework that they've got for assessing future changes to the building standard. We've met a lot of times with MPs and ministers over these years as well. And Geraldine organised a petition which she presented. I attended with her to a select committee. We've had a lot to do with the council over the years as well, providing feedback and sort of in a dual role really, being both affected owners but also trying to help them, see the complexity and the reality at times as well. We've done lots of media interviews, and this has all sort of culminated really in the last 6 months with Craig and Geraldine working incredibly hard on an epic ombudsman complaint, which is really sort of our last shot at getting any sort of official response really from the government. We feel like we've exhausted all the other options. And so Craig and Geraldine spend hours writing that, and that's with the Ombudsman at the moment. We don't know yet whether it's been picked up for investigation, but that is with him. So I'm going to hand over to Craig because he wrote the complaint with Geraldine, and he can tell you a little bit about what the key points were in it, and then I'll come back again.
Thanks, Mel. So, look, I'll talk about the cost-benefit analysis at the moment and the way that doesn't stack up. But as Mel alluded to before, the requirements to earthquake strengthened buildings are going to be financially devastating for many owners, in particular those on fixed and low incomes. Many of them will not be able to enter once they sell, will not be able to enter the property market again. Certainly not in the Wellington region. These are challenging projects, as Mel alluded to before. When we were in the middle of another project, when we found out this news back in 2010, we have a track record of trying to take on challenging projects with this building, but many body corporates simply won't have the skills and capability to manage a project like this. Now, we are heartened, I think, by the work that MB are doing to trial the support for owners to do these sort of projects, and hopefully that gets a sort of further life, because it could be useful for those owners of buildings who just don't have the skills to tackle these particularly challenging projects. We've also been lucky to have some very good professional help. We've been working now, Mel, with project manager for probably at least 10 years with regards to that. And as Mel alluded to before, we also have a very good working relationship with the Westpac Bank and a very good lawyers as well that have been helping us with some of the real legal challenges of this stuff. One of the big challenges with this work is the uncertainty about when does this all stop. I think Mel will talk a little bit later on about some of the more challenging buildings in Wellington who have strengthened and then finding that they're having to strengthen again. But one of the big challenges that the earthquake requirements are in regulations, and that means that a minister and officials can basically change them on a whim. There's no requirement for any parliamentary consideration. So I think that's one of the things that we see as a real issue. We'd like to see that actually in those requirements in the Act and requiring the consideration of Parliament before any changes were undertaken with that. I'm sure those of you who are in apartment buildings will be aware of the significant increase in insurance costs over the last wee while. I'm sure we're all feeling that. Effectively, owners of earthquake-prone buildings are paying double. They're not only paying significant amounts in insurance, and it's one of our biggest bills, isn't it? And I know some in the Central City, the insurance bills are huge, but also then having to strengthen on top of that as well. So those are significant challenges, and effectively paying twice for the same thing. And sort of finally in this list, New Zealand is well out of step with what is international practice with regards to earthquake-prone requirements. For example, in Italy, they have a similar system to us, but they only require strengthening for strategic buildings such as hospitals, police stations, schools. Any buildings that want to meet their earthquake-prone requirements are actually eligible for financial assistance. And again, it's similar in the United States, where only certain buildings are required to meet earthquake-prone requirements, like those with unreinforced masonry, which is actually what it used to be like before the changes in 2004 with the Building Act. So, and again, there's financial assistance available to them. So New Zealand is quite unique in not providing significant financial assistance to those having to strengthen. In 2013, MB commissioned a cost-benefit analysis looking at the earthquake-prone requirements to inform the work that MB and ministers were then looking at to change the requirements. That ultimately led to the 2017 changes to the Building Act. There's a number of scenarios in that cost-benefit analysis, but the one that we think most likely reflects the current situation is up here on the board. So what we're talking about is costs of $1.7 billion and benefits of $37 million. So what that effectively means, for every dollar that you'd be spending in cost to strengthen a building, the earthquake requirements in New Zealand, you get 2 cents back. That's the cost benefit. So benefits of 2 cents, costs of $1. Now that was based on the costs to strengthen of about $300 per square metre. Our building, our apartments are 60 square metres. If that was the case, we would be paying $18,000 each to strengthen our building. We wouldn't be standing here tonight, would we, Mel? We would have done it, and we'd be quite happy. Thanks very much. Based on the 180,000 per square metre that we did back in 2020, we found that it was actually $3,000 per square metre, not the $300 that MB found. The same time, Geraldine was leading a survey of inner city Wellington buildings. They came to the exact same conclusion. On average, the cost per building in Wellington was $300,000 per apartment, and those apartment size on average were 100 square metres. So what we know is we expect that the costs are out by a factor of 10. So that means that for every dollar that you would spend in costs, you don't get 2 cents worth of benefit back. You get 0.02 of a cent back. It doesn't make any sense. No government would make any investment with a cost-benefit analysis like that. You wouldn't build a road. You wouldn't build a school. Could we just move on to the next slide? I think, is that yours, Mel? Yes, it is. Yeah. I'm handing back.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, so that cost-benefit analysis was part of the regulatory impact statement that was looked at by the government at the time, but for whatever reason that was ignored. So part 3 of our story really has sort of emerged in probably the last 2 or 3 months. We've spent a lot of time banging on doors and trying to get people interested. Our partners are absolutely sick of it. Everyone that we know, their eyes glaze over when we talk about it. It's very hard to get interest in this because it's sort of about safety, it's about property, and those things don't really sort of, people just don't seem to want to talk about it. But what happened at the end of last year, which was really interesting, was that a whole lot of things happened at once, which suddenly seemed to have sort of ignited people's interest in this again, or maybe for the first time. One was that our city council is grappling with enormous cost blowouts on the town hall. The Michael Fowler Centre and the Opera House were both declared earthquake prone last year. As you'll all know, the Central Library is undergoing a hugely costly strengthening project at the moment. And then there was an earthquake prone building called the Tumouth Building on Gusney Street, which had been derelict for years, and that had a fire. And following that fire, it was agreed that it would be demolished. And Councillor Iona Pannett was quoted in the media as saying, "Don't buy apartments in Wellington," because this was an earthquake-prone building, and the owner had obviously sat on it and not either not wanted to or not been able to do anything with it. But that really caught people's attention, and she was in the media for a few days talking about that. Around about the same time, the Egmont Street apartments got quite a lot of press about having to strengthen again. Is that, yep. And it felt like there was suddenly this sort of momentum around a feeling of, has New Zealand got this right? Can we keep paying as individuals and ratepayers for these sorts of projects? Is that realistic? How do you balance things like life safety and risk versus heritage concerns versus livability versus the housing crisis? You know, all of these things are like a big wicked problem that seems to have sort of got people's attention in the last few months. At the end of last year, the City Council actually presented, one of their own teams presented to their councillors their concerns about the backlog in Wellington alone, of a whole lot of buildings coming up for their deadlines of 2027, and that just even if there was willingness in the cohort of owners to do the work, there simply wasn't even the capacity in Wellington or New Zealand to do it in terms of, construction, professionals, all that sort of thing. So it's shaped up to be this big problem that people are starting to ask questions about. Obviously, we've had a new government elected since October last year, and I think one thing that we're feeling quite hopeful about at the moment is that the new Minister for Building and Construction, Chris Penk, has expressed some interest in potentially bringing forward a review of the regime, which so we're going to meet with him next week to talk more about that, along with Geraldine from Inner City Wellington. So that's promising. And when we talk to him, when we talk to him, we're going to be telling him what we want, which is that we want a really thorough review of this whole system, asking the question, have we got it right? We will be strongly suggesting that review is independent and that it is not conducted by the same agency that developed the policy and has been implementing it. We're going to be asking for financial support. So if owners do want to strengthen, that they can access some kind of funding for that to reflect the public benefit, and also the return to the Crown through all of the tax taken through all of that activity. And I think the third key thing that we'd be asking for is that we're looking for some certainty. I mean, these are obviously very uncertain times, but it's unthinkable for us to recommend to our owners, having been through 2 big projects already, and asking them to come up with significant amounts of money for two things already. It's unthinkable for us at the moment to write a proposal to our owners to say, we think this is the right thing to do, because we can't be sure that we're not going to find ourselves sliding backwards in terms of the increasing standards and how people might perceive our building. So the NBS is the new building standard, and what that point means is that at the moment the requirement to strengthen is expressed as a percentage of the building standard, but of course the building standard is always going up. And even though in theory we've only been asked to strengthen to the 2017 standard, what we're worried about is that as soon as the standard goes up again, the market will get an understanding of what that means, and will be trying to understand, well, what does it mean in today's terms? What is it in the new building standard? Is it 67% or is it 45%? And we could end up back in sort of a no man's land of having unsaleable apartments. So that's really the end of it. It probably goes without saying that it's pretty stressful. It's been extremely time consuming for all of us. And I think, there's sort of a bunch of people that don't really know what their future is. And a lot of people that are stuck, really. Normally with an asset like property, you can kind of buy and sell, and you might take a bit of a bath if the market's not so great, but you're not expecting to maybe find yourself out of the housing market as a result. And with earthquake strengthening, when we first started this project, we realised quite quickly that the way people look at strengthening is not that it's adding value. It's really just that it's bringing it back to what it should have been. It's a bit like sort of plumbing or wiring. You're not going to sort of go, oh, yay, I'm going to pay an extra whatever for that. So in terms of values, basically our valuer said, you're worth what you'd be worth if you weren't earthquake prone, minus the cost to strengthen, and then minus some more for the risk. So if we strengthen, we put all our money back into basically getting back to square one where we would have been if we weren't earthquake prone. And I just point that out because it might seem obvious, but I think to some people it's not obvious, and they think, oh, well, that'll be good. It's like putting in a new kitchen. Well, it's not. So yeah, that's the end of our presentation. Thanks for listening, and hand over to Jane.
I just really want to acknowledge the tenacity that Mel and Craig have for this topic, because I think that it's, you just know that this must have been so stressful and so difficult. So if you don't mind, can we just give them another round of applause for that? I know you'll probably have questions, but just hold them till the end if you don't mind. Otherwise, we might go down a rabbit hole. I just want to introduce now David Middleton, because we've been talking about risk and the balancing risk. So that's all about, I think the insurance industry knows all about that. So David Middleton has had a 40-year career in general insurance, including 17 years as the head of the Earthquake Commission from 1993 to 2010. So I'll get him now to come to the podium and talk to you. Thanks.
Kia ora tātou. I don't want to take up too much time because I want to leave plenty of time to listen to your concerns and make sure that we try to address them. So this is by way of sort of seeding the conversation. I am aware that the Unit Titles Act puts restrictions on what bodies corporate can do about their insurance. It's a bit ambiguous, and I think there are people who are looking at interpreting it. But I would like to set that aside in the interests of examining the possibilities without that being there, or without its ambiguities being there. Let's hope that one day they are removed. First of all, something about the EQC cover, or the Natural Hazards Commission, as it's going to be called later on this year. I found that nearly everybody's aware that EQC covers the first $300,000 per dwelling, but I've also found that many are not so very knowledgeable about the further ramifications of that cover. The Earthquake Commission Act insures residential buildings, and a residential building is a building that has dwellings in it, one or more, a dwelling being a self-contained home. The way that the Act comes to a limit on what is in what a residential building is insured for under the Act is to multiply 300,000 by the number of apartments. You'll know that, where you've got an apartment building. But what a lot of people don't realise is that if you have a claim, it's not limited to $300,000 to each apartment. You get the whole sum insured can be applicable to anywhere in the building. So your 28 apartment building is insured by EQC for 8.4 million. That 8.4 million can be expended anywhere in the residential building. It's not limited to $300,000 any one apartment. So for example, the roof of the apartment building is damaged, and that affects the 3 apartments that are on the top floor. You could spend the whole amount of cover on the residential building on repairing the roof, not just $300,000 on each apartment. So one question that you might address, having considered what you would do as a body corporate if your building were seriously damaged in an earthquake or one of the other things that EQC covers, is EQC's cover enough? Do you need the top-up cover? You've got $8.4 million of cover courtesy of EQC on your 28 apartment building. Do you need any more? Now to the also, I should point out that the excess has the same basis. It is one excess, and it is $500 times the number of apartments. So you've got a $14,000 excess on your claim of 8.4 million, or up to 8.4 million. So you've got a higher excess as well as the cover. Now, in New Zealand, insurers currently provide homeowners insurance or dwelling insurance as a commodity. Apart from the price, it's vanilla. You get the same cover wherever you are. And this is slowly changing as I hear announcements from IAG and Tower, the Tower saying that they're going to look at offering separate perils insurance, and IAG making noises about actually tailoring insurance better. So it's changing slowly, but consumers could get this accelerated if we join together a number of bodies, corporate or a collection of consumers, to actually press for insurance companies to drop this commoditizing of insurance and actually provide insurance that meets the needs of particular areas. For example, if I've been talking to people in West Auckland and who were very badly affected by Cyclone Gabriel, and they're facing the prospect of insurance companies pulling out of insuring them because they're frightened of the landslip risk. Well, why wouldn't they offer fire cover and burglary cover and flooding cover if they're frightened only of landslip risk? But they've only got one product, and it either fits or it doesn't. And this is what is slowly changing, but we can accelerate this. So if there were different types of insurance cover, what could you choose? I've already mentioned looking at the statutory cover you get through EQC and asking yourself, well, is that all we need for earthquake cover in our situation, and what would happen in the event of an earthquake? What would happen to our apartment block? You could get indemnity-based policies. The difference between replacement value and indemnity value is that with replacement value, you get new for old. So the roof that's damaged, you get a new roof if you've got replacement value cover. If you've got indemnity cover, the insurance company says, oh, that roof was 50 years old. It's probably had, or 20 years old rather, it's probably would last 50 years under normal circumstances. We'll give you 60%. Pay 60% because you've had 40% of the use of it. That's indemnity. And when I talk about indemnity, and when I talk about going back to naming the perils instead of having all risks cover, one cover, I go back to my early days in insurance when that was what it was. You bought fire cover with extraneous perils on your home, and there were 5 extraneous perils. You could have just fire insurance, or you could have the extraneous perils, which were impact by motor vehicles, burglary, internal water, storm and flood, and strangely enough, things dropping out of aeroplanes. And you could only get indemnity cover because that's what insurance is. It indemnifies you. It puts you back in the financial position you were in before you had to claim, before the event that gave rise to the claim. Now, replacement value cover does more than that. It gives you new for old. It pays for what's called betterment. So this is the nub of the ambiguity of the Unit Titles Act. It talks about insuring for full insurable value. Well, full insurable value is the indemnity value. It's not the replacement value. So you could insure for indemnity. The other thing about indemnity policies and replacement policies assume that you will replace. The deal is basically you go back and repair or replace what you had before, go back to exactly what you had before, and we, the insurance company, will pay for it. If you don't want to do that, if you want to change the layout, if you want the cash to do something different, if you want to even relocate and replace the building somewhere else, the insurance company is entitled to say, well, that then reverts to indemnity. So you've paid for a replacement value policy and you're only getting an indemnity settlement. Unless the insurance policy actually states that it will pay for relocation on a replacement value basis, or it will pay replacement cost even though you don't actually replace, then the insurance company can revert to indemnity. So if you've got an apartment block where you say, well, you know, if we had a serious damage to this apartment block, would we really want it exactly the way it was? Or would we want to change some things around? If that's the case, then maybe look at indemnity-only policies, because you're only going to get indemnity anyway. The named perils cover I've talked about, and that's coming back in again. You can, if you get, you always get fire insurance against fire. And the thing to remember in New Zealand is once you've insured a building against fire, you get EQC's cover. That is automatic. EQC cannot decline your cover. So just by buying a fire policy, you're getting fire, earthquake, volcanic eruption, tsunami, landslip, and hydrothermal activity cover up to the EQC limit. So could you look at the actual perils that you're insuring against, and limit yourself to fire cover? You could get particular perils excluded. You know, if you've got a particular landslip risk in your apartment, well, you may have to take special steps to try to reduce that risk without trying to transfer it to an insurance company at their premium. Say, okay, exclude the landslip risk, or put a $20,000 excess on the landslip risk, but we want the other cover as per normal. So you can think about you can think about that. There is the self-insurance route to go. With the big EQC excess, if you've got your 28 apartments or more, you could set up a bank account. Everybody puts some money into it, and any claims under that excess, or any claims up to the excess, could be paid out of that account. You could do that not just for the EQC excess, but you could take a, I don't know, $50,000 excess on the apartment block and set up an account to reimburse people who have small claims. Now that has to be done very carefully, of course, and my recommendations would include actually having a policy wording, so that somebody says they dropped a kettle and spilt hot water all over something, and they want to claim, well, is that covered by our policy? And have a look at that. You also, very importantly, have to have provisions if the bank account is not sufficient, if it runs out of money. And there are ways you can that have been used, from an extra impost on the owners that they have to top up the bank account, to actually delaying all claims payments until the end of the year, adding them all up, looking in the bank account, and it's a bit like a bankruptcy. Everybody gets 70 cents in the dollar on their claim if there isn't enough money. A good way, if you want to be serious about this, is to employ a broker. All the large insurance brokers operate a claims management business, so they could manage it for you. You could have your bank account or investments, and tell the broker to write you an insurance policy, and tell the flat owners, if they want to make a claim on our self-insurance scheme, go see the broker, phone up the broker, and he'll tell you the terms and conditions, and even employ a loss adjuster if the claim is enough. You need to investigate the liability for the fire service levy if you set up a large enough self-insurance scheme. I'm not sure of the rules there, but that needs to be looked into, and again, a broker could advise you on that. And there are other forms of cover, total loss only cover, where it would only pay out if your building is completely destroyed, or has damage which is more than 80% or some percentage of the total value. It pays out the total value. The insurance companies are talking about parametric cover, which I'd be very careful about. Parametric cover is based on the event occurring and not the damage that happens. So a parametric cover would say, okay, if a 7.5 earthquake or greater magnitude earthquake strikes within these latitudes and longitudes, which are where Wellington is, then you get the money. Now, the problem with that is you've got what's called basis risk. You could have the 7.5 earthquake and your apartment's fine, but you still get the money. Or you could have a 7.2 earthquake and your apartment building is destroyed and the insurance company says, no, I didn't get 7.5. So it's one thing or the other. It's very much like a catastrophe bond, which is what EQC has just indulged itself in. Wouldn't have done it in my time, but I'd have died in a ditch over it. But they've gone in for a catastrophe bond. So there are things that insurance companies can do, and there are things that you can do, perhaps, but for the Unit Titles Act. But I think the Unit Titles Act is being looked into. It is ambiguous. I think the argument I've put that even as it's written now, that full insurable value is actually indemnity value. So if it is a strong one, so especially if EQC's cover is actually higher than the indemnity value of your apartment block. If you've got an older apartment block, that could well be the case. Then you could seriously look at not taking earthquake cover top-up cover from the insurance company. And finally, I'd say that it is important, I think, to join forces with whoever you can, bodies, corporate, and present the insurance company with a market and say, look, we want to buy fire and these perils cover. We are prepared to take a $10,000 excess. We think that if you were to offer that sort of product out there, then you've got a market. In the end, insurance companies have got to sell insurance. You know, it's all very well them saying we're not going to insure in that area anymore and that area anymore, and we're not going to insure you anymore, and we're going to make your premiums unaffordable. But they've got to sell insurance. That's what they're in the business of doing. So if we can demonstrate that actually you could sell us some insurance at an affordable price, if we found a way around this thing that's really frightening you, earthquake cover in Wellington or whatever it is, then we could get them to move a little faster. I noted that IAG's comment about we will look at insurance policies, the terms and conditions of insurance companies policies was rapidly added to with the comment, but not this year. You know, not yet. You know, sometime we'll look at it. Well, you know, sometime never is not good enough for us. So I hope that's given you a little bit of food for thought, and I think we're open for questions.
Thank you very much, David. I might get Richard to move about with the microphone. So if anyone has got a question they would like to ask, there's, I see a hand. Poor Richard. Go to the farthest spot down there. This gentleman over there. Can you see down there? And the sun's in our eyes a wee bit. That's why we're all squinting. Yeah. So if you could let us know who you would like to answer the question, that would be handy. Thank you.
Thanks. To both Mel and Craig, really. I'm the chair of T-Store Body Corporate down at Egmont Street. And your story is very, very similar to our story, but we're probably a little bit more advanced than you. We're now 14 months past our deadline, and we've been waiting with bated breath to see if the council are going to fine us. They've got the ability to fine all our owners up to $300,000 each, or they're going to evict us. The issue for us, I don't think you quite touched on it, is basically that we tried our level best, but we could not get a fixed price contract to do the work down in Egmont Street. Our quantity surveyor, the builders we had in said, So they gave us a really, really vague number. So had we entered into a contract, which was way above our means, we could seriously have faced the prospect of having to pay another 25, 30%, excuse me, so contingencies wouldn't have been enough. So I think for us who've been through this, the biggest impediment, and we're all law-abiding citizens, we don't want to contravene the law, we don't want to be fined, we don't want to be evicted, but we simply couldn't access money to do the job. We've got ages ranging from 83, our 83-year-old's just broken his hip, so he's not much good at the moment, down to about 40, and there was simply no way they can raise the capital. So it's not that we don't want to do the work, it's just simply we can't access the capital. So that leaves us in a position as owners that we could be receiving a letter from council to be evicted, and we've decided that we will fight. They'll have to drag us out of there kicking and screaming. The 80-year-olds and the 70-year-olds are not going to be kicked out of their home. So if that happens, we're looking for a large contingent down at Egmont Street to support it. And this is sort of a bit of a story and less of a question, but that's where we are at the moment. And for a number of our owners, they've been through living hell, waiting for a letter to come from council to say, you know, we're going to evict, we're going to fine. And I'll just close with this last comment, that the council have got Beckers in to have a look at the safety of the building, and that's a fantastic report. Must have cost them probably about $20,000. It's about 35 pages. It goes through all the engineering things, but up front, the engineers said, look, in terms of the risks that we all face in life every day, as pedestrians, as cyclists, as motorists, and all sorts of things, the risks to anybody, including occupants and people walking down Egmont streets, are absolutely negligible. And I think in a nutshell that the engineer sort of said to everybody, come on, let's have some common sense here. But it's probably a bit of a speech, but we are waiting for this letter. But as a group of owners, we've tried everything. We've spent almost $1 million on engineers and allied professionals, and everyone said, enough's enough, this is crazy. So we will not be moved out of there. There'll be a full and large and, could be violent protests, but people are not moving. So, sorry, that's a bit of a speech, and I'm sorry. That doesn't have a question.
Thank you. Thank you. There's one just down here. If you just make sure that mic's on, because I think I might have turned it off.
Thank you. I have to admit to being an engineer. I'd just like to ask Mel a couple of questions, but firstly make the observation that an earthquake-prone building in Wellington, if it was moved to Auckland, would be 100%. So you won't get a lot of support up there. It seems to be very much a Wellington issue, really, and the politicians don't really care that much. The other thing Mel said was that I didn't realise that, although I know that the current legislation, I think it's 133 or something in the Act, is the earthquake-prone building definition, but it says it applies to, it has to be measured against an earthquake as if it was as if it was being assessed in 2017. But I didn't realise that it doesn't take an Act of Parliament to change that, and that is very chilling. Very chilling, and I think we've got to fight that one intensely because, there's all this Hikarangi Trent stuff, and there's committees sitting out there, what's the word, Adam? Deliberated, thank you. And they've just come back a few days ago with the new code for new buildings, and it's horrendous. The interesting thing is that our current code sets the risk level at 1 micromort. In other words, if you live in a modern building designed by the code, you're expected to have 1 chance in 1 million of being killed in an earthquake if you occupy that building. Now, that is extremely low. If you look at the number of people, day lives of people since the Napier earthquake. And out of all the people that are killed in New Zealand due to earthquakes, it's less than 1 micromort. And I haven't got the numbers in front of me about what flying aeroplanes are, but I think it's 78,000 micromorts, which is not much. You know, car accidents, drinking too much alcohol, you name it, it's up there. So the risks are very low. So my real question to you, Mel, is what did you ask your consultants to design your strengthening to, and what set that level?
Kia ora, thanks for your question. We asked them to design to 67% of the new building standard. So for those who don't know, the risks are set in 3 sections. You've got 0 to 33% is earthquake prone, 34 to 67 is considered earthquake risk, and then 67 to 100 is, I don't know what it's called, but you're fine. The reason that we asked to go to 67 was that what we were being told by our valuer was that the market was starting to get wind of this idea of NBS and percentages of NBS. And they sort of, I guess the market being people making decisions about buying things, had sort of coalesced around this idea of 67% being the right sort of number, that you wouldn't want to go under that. So we explored options either side. So we explored going to 100%, and we also explored going to 34 only. 34 was almost as expensive as going to 67. It wasn't that much difference. It was sort of, it's sort of not quite a rounding error, but you know, if you're doing that, you might as well do that kind of scenario. But the 67 to 100 was, I think it was double or something. So it was a big leap there, and that's quite building specific. I understand it depends on where the weakness is in your building as to how easy it is to kind of shore that up. And so with our particular building, that was how it fell. So that's what our current design is. That one that was costed last in 2021 for 180,000 is based on 67% of the new building standard, which is the 2017 standard. And we know that the standard, we don't know. We know that there's been a whole lot of work done on a hazard model, so that engineers are now looking at that and how that's going to affect the building standard in the future. We're expecting that the standard will go up because they've basically they have found that there is a higher level, what's their term? Higher level of hazard. So we're expecting that it will go up, but that's what Engineering New Zealand and MB and all those parties will be grappling with at the moment. Yeah.
And that's not, just to clarify, that's not necessarily a bad thing, in a sense that the best time to actually to get the measurement, the standard that you want for a building is when you build it, right? So having a strong and good standard when you build a building makes sense. It's the application of a new expectations on a building once it's been built is the real problem. It's like expecting a 60s car to meet current day emission standards. There'd be nothing left by the time you actually got somewhere near those new standards. Correct. No.
I've got a question. So you've got a meeting with Minister Chris Pink next week, I think, and you've talked about wanting an independent review. But I was just wondering, you've done a lot of work in this area. Do you actually have a clear sense of what changes in the legislation, in your ideal world you'd like to see? Or is that too big a question?
Oh, God, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and Mel really touched on it. Mel touched on it before. So the key thing is, as was alluded to before, we need a separate earthquake standard, and we need that in the Act to give owners the certainty, so that if there are any changes in the future, that needs to be done by and considered by Parliament because of the seriousness of that. Secondly, even if tomorrow apartment owners were not required to strengthen, and that's something that we do think needs to be considered. Even if that was the case, the problem wouldn't go away, right? We'd still have problems with value and expectations from the market given what has happened to date. So we think that some sort of financial scheme, and as Mel alluded to before, that needs to recognise the significant tax take that happens in these things. So again, I'm not a tax expert, but 15% of the costs is going to be GST, and there are other taxes on top of that. So you probably get pretty close to a quarter of the costs going directly to the government. Now, given the public benefits to this work, it is reasonable for the government to consider providing, in my view, grant funding to owners to at least that level to actually soften the blow of this work.
Thanks, Craig. James, I think Richard will bring you the microphone there.
Yeah, hi. I live in Newtown and I can see your apartment building from where I live. And I remember it being built. I've just got a couple of curious questions. Just to clarify, you haven't spent any money on earthquake strengthening up till now. Is there any evidence in the last 50 years of any earthquake damage? There's been through Kaikoura, we've been, is there anything, that's obvious?
There's been minor damage to some of the apartments and some of the earthquakes that we've had, more in the nature of cracks and jib board and things like that, and wallpaper opening up, and we've put in EQC claims for that and had that all tidied up. Well, the owners have.
No structural?
No.
And how much each have you spent up to date in terms of?
We've spent $200,000 or over $200,000 as a building, so divide that by 28. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
There's a guy right there. With the beard.
Yeah. Other Richard at the back. Is it? Yep.
One of the issues that perhaps could be raised with the Minister is the suspensory loan. I wasn't aware that they still existed. And the agency Kaikoura is under pressure right now, so it may not be the most easy time. Do you know more about that? How much are they provided? Are they serious about it, or do they put as many obstacles in the way as possible? Because that is a serious way in which government could address the funding issue.
Yeah, I think they are serious about it. We've had quite a lot to do with the person that owns that particular product at Kaikoura, and we've had nothing but sort of genuine engagement from that person. The settings weren't right when the scheme was launched. There were numerous holes in it, things like they required people to still be living in the building, when in fact, like our building, probably half of the owners have moved out for various life reasons, but we're still kind of owners that should be able to access that money, we thought. I think they wrongly thought that anyone that didn't live there was just an investor. So those sort of nuances weren't, those settings weren't right. How it works is you can borrow up to $250,000. It's charged at, I think it's 60% of the Reserve Bank's rate. And we, if we were in a position where we felt like we had the certainty we need to go ahead with it, and we thought on balance, considering everything, this was the right thing to do, we would enter that scheme, and some of our owners would be eligible for it. What are the other key features of it? You don't need to pay back, you don't need to service it, and you don't need to pay it back until you either die or you move away. So you still need to pay it back, so it's significant whack, either I guess to somebody's estate or to their retirement prospects. So it's not, it was sort of a piece of the puzzle, but it didn't solve it for us. Yeah.
I think this gentleman here, in the middle here. Yep, there you go. Just there, yeah, that's right.
Thanks. Great sympathies. I mean, I hear your stories and the pain that people have that have got high insurance is nothing compared to the pain that you've been through. Some time ago, Geraldine joined up with a group of us who were having a bitch and a moan about our insurance premiums, and we started an entity called Coverwell, and it's got two parts to it. One is to be looking at the earthquake-prone issues, but bringing people together so that we can act with a common voice. And the other one, because the thing that David talked about, about the insurance issue, but the twin sort of dragons of the banks and the insurance companies are basically holding everybody to ransom. And the problem that we've got is that if you can't insure, or if we move to risk-based pricing, then we're going to end up in an even more desperate situation. And so I think that we're at the stage now where I think that if we've got a new minister that's showing some interest, if the government is genuinely concerned about wanting to encourage some growth in Wellington, to allow development to happen, then we've got some huge opportunities to put a lot of pressure together. But at the moment, the insurance companies have got a running riot. So our insurance premiums on our building have gone up by about 4 to 5 times. So they used to be comparable to our rates, and they're now around about 4 to 5 times our level of rates. And they're talking glibly about it going up another 20 to 30%. So, to add that on to the earthquake-prone buildings. So I think we're at a situation now where individually we can't do a damn thing. Ministers won't take a blind bit of notice. When individual groups go, I think that this is actually a time, and it's not just going to be a Wellington issue. I think that increasingly, as natural disaster issues become more prevalent around the rest of the country, I think that Wellington's a good place to start. We've got 4,500 apartments in Wellington with a total value of about $5 billion and about 10,000 people paying around about $50 million a year in insurance premiums. And we've got to bring together that collateral and that strength and actually start being clear about the three issues: earthquake-prone buildings, the banking sector, who generally, when they offer up insurance or encourage people, they get about a third of the premium for, so a third of the premiums, these outrageous premiums, go to the banks just for the courtesy of passing somebody on. We've got to hold these people to account. It's complicated, but it's a journey. Join us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, hi. Adam Thorne is my name. I am an engineer. I live in an apartment, which is not earthquake prone. But a couple of comments, if I may, and then a couple of questions for David. Just first of all, this increase in the national hazard that people are talking about. We've got to say that as engineering practitioners, we're really scared about that. I mean, the bare figures for Wellington are about 100% increase. But sorry, it was about 100% doubling. Now that's what just trying to cut a long story short. That's what the boffins are telling us. There's going to be quite a lot of engineering practitioner pushback. It is not. There's a lot of questions need to be raised about that, but it is an issue now. But I do take a little issue of one of the things you said, Craig, which is that the issue will always be there. But I would say we should push for apartments to be removed from the earthquake-prone legislation altogether, because there is a great inequity in Wellington. There's plenty of houses or brick houses in Thorndon, whatever, houses on steep hillsides. If they were measured by to engineering standards, they would be earthquake-prone. But those individual houses, building owners, they do not suffer the loss of equity, which all apartment owners do. So I think it's worth thinking about that. And a couple of issues that you talked about, Mel, and that's those, really interesting numbers that are what you pay versus the benefit. And I'm not an expert in this, but I understand the benefit is, if there is a big event, what is the reduced cost of damage and putting it right, and social costs and all those things. And so it's a tiny amount. And as Peter down here talked about, the low risks, what is the real benefit you get? The life safety risk in a big city, the reduction by this earthquake would be infinitesimal already of benefit in terms of life safety. Those are some real issues that the government need to consider in their review, I think, and it's important to do that. Now, just you talked about 4 or 5 times increase in insurance. Don't forget your rates are going up as well. But and our pubs, we've been there since opening about, I think, 14 years now. Insurance has gone up by 1,000%. In fact, more than that. It's 1,500% because it was 85 grand a year. It's now 1.2 million. Right. So I guess it's a real question is which I think no one's spoken about today is the fact that increase, you can average that out 10%, but in the last 5 or 6 years, that's like 15 to 20% year on year. That is not sustainable for any of us. It's not sustainable for New Zealand Inc. It's not sustainable for the government. And we understand that, David, you might know about this, that I think Treasury is starting to look at it. I guess they're seeing warning signs. So that does suggest to us that central government is going to have to take some action. So two things, 2 ideas. I don't know what you kick. First thing is the EQC, the 300K. To me, it's ridiculous that is a set level right across the country. Now, I know you can say that there are other other hazards, floods and storms, all that sort of stuff, but effectively it's an earthquake, I think I would see in the general population. So to say that here, we in Wellington should get the same 300,000 that somebody in North Auckland or Central Otago where the hazard is minuscule is ridiculous. I mean, the premium we pay for that EQC is quite small. We'd all be happy to pay a bit more for that if there's a bit of a bulge through the seismic centre of New Zealand in terms of what you get back from that. But the other thing, in terms of sustainability of insurance, I'm interested in your comments on that, David, but also that, is it time for the government to actually say, look, we actually need to do something, reinstate state insurance, something to that effect. I mean, you couldn't do it to cover the whole thing, but it needs to be there I think, to give some competition to the offshore insurers. And as you talked about the money that's going, all that's going offshore, it's a terrible thing for New Zealand, although that 50 billion, and it's much more than that. Surely that money could be better invested in New Zealand and used for the benefit of us when there is a disaster.
It'd be the equivalent of Kiwi Bank, so I wouldn't be surprised if the national government would love to set up something like that.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Yeah. But I think we'll get David to answer that one.
Oh, well, yeah. So just very quickly, the seismologists, geotechnical people, they've been doing a lot of studies over the last few years about what's called the National Seismic Hazard Model. So it's a probabilistic model. It looks at seismic events that might happen in a region. So in the Wellington, what is the frequency of a big movement on the Wellington Fault or the Wairarapa Fault, the Hario Fault, faults at the top of the South Island. They all affect us here. Then they put probabilistic effects on how often they're going to occur, what would be the damage, et cetera, and then they come up with a hazard. And of course, Wellington and Hutt, it's slightly higher in Upper Hutt, but this is the area where it's pretty high. Those numbers for across the whole country have gone up. There's something between 50% and 100%. Now, but I say there's a lot of questions need to be asked about that. What does it really mean? Some of it we have to say, I mean, as practitioners, we're saying some of the loads they're talking about, it's just not possible to get through the ground into the foundations of the building. That there needs to be a bit of common sense, so these are other discussions going on. So we think the way that the MB have handled it, we've got a member here, hopefully, but it's not leading it well. They've put this document out without any review as to what what's the business case behind raising this hazard in terms of land value, property values, effect on New Zealand. It's really quite a serious thing that I think they need to get ahead. So I know there's various people trying to talk to the minister, and I've involved a couple of groups trying to do the same as well. I think these are common message we need to keep banging on the door. These are things that need to be reviewed.
I could have quite a lot to say, actually, because you touched on something that I've been banging on about for the last 30 years. The EQC system is inequitable, and one of the worst inequities is the cap and the fact that everybody pays the same premium. I support the solidarity approach that the levy is the same for everybody in the country, because if you have a serious earthquake in this country, everybody's affected, as we found with Christchurch. You might not be physically damaged, but you're affected, the economy's affected, and I support this, what the Europeans would call solidarity. However, EQC covers the first $300,000. And everybody pays the same rate on the $300,000. Now, if you've got a home that's worth $600,000 to replace, you are far less likely to have larger claims than if you've got a home that's worth $6 million to replace. There's far more to be damaged in a larger home, and yet the owner of the larger home is paying exactly the same premium as the owner of the smaller home. In the words of one of my chairs at EQC, the poor are subsidising the rich. The insurance companies would deal with first loss cover in an entirely different way. If you went to an insurance company and said, I've got a home which would cost $1 million to replace, but I only want to insure it for $300,000, which is basically the proposition that EQC puts out, then the insurance company would work out the premium on $1 million and say, tell you what, we'll give you 5% discount because you're only going up to 300,000. And it is that small. I've got a what's called a first loss curve from an insurance company, which shows that if you insured for only 40% first loss cover, the first 40% of damage, then you would pay 92% of the premium that you would pay if you insured for full value, because the prospect is that the first $300,000 is going to be hit far more often than above $300,000, far more often. Now that leads me to the question, or to the conviction actually, which is added to by the fact that there's notion that the EQC cap and the top-up cover sit quite nicely. There's a demarcation line, was proved to be wrong in Christchurch. The number of court cases there were which arose over disagreements between the insurance company and EQC over exactly where the cap sat, what the claim was, whether it was above the cap or under the cap, and whether EQC's cap should apply to the top-up insurance claim or a lesser amount or a larger amount. Hundreds of thousands of dollars difference sometimes. It just didn't work. Partly, EQC's cover is statutory cover. It's a benefit that you're entitled to, just like social welfare. Insurance companies, you enter into a contract, and when you want to trigger that contract by having a claim, you each take your corner and you each negotiate the best deal for yourself. And of course, the insurance company is in a far better position to negotiate than you are, because you don't know the policy backwards like they do, and they can argue all sorts of things. So there is an unequal balance there. But basically, the claim is a negotiated settlement. With EQC, it's not that. It's a statutory right. Now, when you put that on the bottom and the negotiated settlement on top, frequently it doesn't work. And therefore, my argument is that EQC should cover homes for their full replacement value. And work I did some years ago now showed that the increased risk to EQC from its cap to full value was actually minuscule. You could actually lower the rate. When I did the exercise, the rate was 20 cents. It's gone down to 16 cents per $100 cents. And I worked out that at a rate of 10 cents, EQC would still be in about a 400% better position in terms of the growth in the natural disaster fund and the claims than it is by having the cap. The cap is just a total mistake. And you would do away with that inequity of the poor subsidising the rich. The sustainability of insurance companies. Insurance companies have got a double problem, and I'm surprised that they don't actually point this out. Yes, we're seeing increases in the risk, and they've got to, and they're recognising risk, and they're focusing on risk on riskier areas, and they seem to have discovered risk rating. I thought insurance had been risk rating for the last 400 years, but they've suddenly decided their risk rating. So they've decided that their premiums were too low, and let me say that New Zealand has had a fantastic run up to now. When you look at the rest of the world, insurance has been cheap in New Zealand, right up until the Canterbury earthquakes. So we've had some catching up to do. But because of the Canterbury earthquakes, Kaikoura earthquakes, storms and floods, insurance companies have had their reserves seriously depleted. Now, they are required by the Reserve Bank to show that they can meet their liability arising in a 1 in 250 year event or from a serious Wellington earthquake, whichever is larger. So they have to build, if they can't show that, then the Reserve Bank will not allow them to continue trading. So a large part of these huge increases is to build back these reserves. And they've got to do that. Now, that's what's called payback in the insurance industry. And what normally happens, and you can see this most often in the international reinsurance market, is of course the insurance companies that have to pay back are the ones that are here and had to pay and had to incur the losses. It is an opportunity for new insurance companies to come in and say, well, we haven't got any payback. We didn't pay for Christchurch. We weren't here. We weren't here for Cyclone Gabriel. We can actually establish ourselves, put up the required reserves, and commence trading. The question is, how do you encourage new insurance companies to come in? As I say, you could see it in the reinsurance industry. We used to talk about the class of 92. After the huge hurricane in Florida in 1992, several insurance companies went broke. The others shot their premiums up through the roof. Reinsurers wanted their payback as well. Millions and billions of dollars US were poured into the reinsurance market with head offices in Bermuda. And that was the class of 92, a dozen new reinsurance companies who just undercut Munich Re, Swiss Re, all these others. And you had the class of 95 after Hurricane Katrina, exactly the same thing. And after the World Trade Center as well. So this is what happens. I think a problem we've got now is because all over the world these disasters are happening. So all these reinsurance companies are hurting, and of course they're all looking at climate change, and everybody's expecting insurance to not be such a fun game anymore. So it's not happening as quickly, but somehow to get the premiums adjusted, you need to attract new players to the market. And maybe new reinsurers, because the premiums for catastrophe perils is highly influenced by reinsurers, because insurance companies in New Zealand are generally very highly reinsured. They hive off a large part of their risk to the overseas reinsurance market. Then if there were some new reinsurers that came in, they could offer the reinsurance cheaper. So the big conundrum is, how do you attract new capital to the market, both worldwide and in New Zealand? And perhaps setting up a state insurance office, but probably this government, being right of centre, would probably be more inclined to try to attract new players into the market. Yeah. Sorry, that was such a lengthy
great.
response.
It's super interesting. I feel like I've learned more about insurance than I ever thought possible, and it's actually more interesting than I thought. But I'm just conscious of time, and I also think that I think there'll be people who want to actually connect with a few other people in the room here tonight. So if there aren't any further questions, I think we might just close if that's... Oh, okay, microphone there, yep.
We're looking at potentially going to indemnity insurance, but our question is, would that be an issue with people getting a mortgage to buy apartments if we sell them? Would that... We're company share MBS 37, so we have issues around that anyway, but we're wondering, well then, I'm actually waiting to hear back from a broker about that, but that was a quite a pertinent question, because we...
I might, it sounds like there's a few people who want to talk to you about that. So I see Ian also behind you. Just, is there anything quick, Ian, or?
Yeah, just times against us. One is Kayorora, and I may have this incorrectly, but my understanding is, one, the pool of money they've got is 10 million, and therefore that will run out pretty quickly if a lot of people want 250,000. Secondly, it is confusing. I've read their whole terms. It's a little bit confusing, full insurance or indemnity insurance. They highlight full insurance, but the reality of it is, which must be made clear to the minister, you can't get full insurance in Wellington. So therefore, the Kayorora thing becomes a bit of a nonsense, saying you've got to have full insurance, but you can't get full insurance in Wellington. So if that was rigidly interpreted, that would be difficult. My second question is more to, or my second comment is more to these distinguished engineers who are sitting around me, is that the apartment building I'm in, which is well known, called Herbert Gardens, as I describe it, Lady Herbert Gardens rides on boldly and confidently into the sunset, whereas other buildings in recent earthquakes, brand new buildings, had to be demolished. And yet they had a much higher rating. And that's why I think the point that's been made today is absolutely relevant, that the rating system of MBS has to be looked at in the context, and I think Adam made this clear, has to be looked at in the context of where you are, the type of earthquake, etc., instead of just saying, that building's got 20%, it's dangerous, get out of it. When, as I say, dear old Herbert Gardens gallantly goes on through earthquake after earthquake, and other buildings get demolished.
Well, that's the irony. I think we've seen so many examples of that, quite modern buildings being brought down, and you'd have to, what a waste of money that is. Look, I think we might just let some of people connect with each other who have the answers to those things, because otherwise we could be here for quite some time.
Don't hold people up now. They're just the statements.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you everyone for coming along tonight. I hope you've learned something. I hope it sounds like we need a groundswell of people to get together and try to find the solution. So I hope you can make some connections tonight with other people, and we can find some solutions. And thank you so much for our guests, and thank you so much for Inner City Wellington also for helping to promote this, and to St. Peter's for hosting us tonight, and to our crew here who have done the technical work. So thanks everybody.
Hello, Ian. Nice to see you.